Hey, I just want to share a word that I think is very appropriate for our times. It's a message that comes from a book that was written about 400 years ago called The Leviathan by Thomas Hobbes, an English scholar, political theorist, and philosopher. He lived during the English Civil Wars of the 1600s, a time when there was a lot of civil unrest, people dying left and right, being hung in the marketplaces, people trying to topple the King of England. And all of this lay heavily on Hobbes' heart. He put forth his book, The Leviathan, in hopes of quelling the tensions. And most of his theory, a lot of his ideas, came from his favorite book, which was The History of the Peloponnesian War by Thucydides. It was written about 400 BC. Hobbes actually translated this book into English. Again, it was one of his favorite books. One of the things that Thucydides talked about in his book was what the world was like prior to our established social institutions. So what the world was like before government, before society. And he says basically that there were no distinct nations, there were no country boundary lines, nothing like that. Everybody was constantly on the move, hiding in mountains because of marauding bandits and pirates, and life was just chaotic before civilization. And that the great conquerors, Alexander the Great, Cyrus, even the Romans, that when they conquered, and we see this also later in history with Genghis Khan, when he did the same thing in China and Asia, the conquerors came in with their strong hand, yes, to get taxes, yes, to get riches, but one of their incentives, one of the things that they promoted and told the people they were doing in conquering was, hey, we're bringing peace to you. We're bringing civilization. We're going to stop these pirates, these people who are just coming around and raping you whenever they want to. All this craziness. They brought society. You had the Pax Romana, the 100 years of peace, the golden age of the Roman Empire across the Mediterranean, a lot of it under Caesar Augustus. Many people saw the conquerors as heroes, and many people understood that it was relatively reasonable to submit. They saw these conquerors as being the hand of God. Even Josephus, one of the generals of the Jewish army, when the Romans came to Israel, you know, the Jews were very obstinate, very, who was it? Tacitus maybe talked about how the Jews were the most difficult people to subdue because, of course, they had their own ideologies, the messianic prophecies, and they said, no, we're submitting to our Messiah, not to some heathen, pagan, Roman king. Caesar's not our God. We're looking for the Messiah. And Josephus was a general of the Israeli army when they clashed, and it was one of the hardest fights that the Romans ever had to put up with. And even Josephus gave up and said, you know what, these Romans, they are the hand of God, they are God sent, and we should submit to them. And he surrendered and actually ended up working for the Romans. And so anyway, Hobbes takes this ideology, this idea of a Leviathan, coming from, if you know the Bible, from the book of Job, where God answers Job and says, are you able to put a hook into Leviathan's nostrils and draw him out the water? This, whether mythological or real sea monster, supposedly like the strongest, the most powerful of God's creations, the most vicious, most dangerous. Hobbes says that government should be a Leviathan, that it should be the most awe-inspiring, the most powerful entity of all, so that everybody will submit, so that they all agree to just live in peace. Because if not, this guy's got the sword. Even Paul talks about that in the book of Romans. He says, you know, submit to government because they are the sword of God. And so Hobbes puts forth this book during the English Civil War, hopefully to get people to just relax, man, obey the King of England. And one of the things that he says is that, this is a quote from Leviathan, that life outside of society is short, solitary, nasty, and brutish. And he basically says that government, almost any government, is better than no government. That almost any treatment you might put up with from the government is better than living outside of government as a savage, picking berries, being threatened by a tomahawk to cut your head off, somebody come in and raping your whole family. Almost any social institution is better than anarchy. Almost any government is better than anarchy. No government at all, just free-for-all, every man for himself, kill everything, blah, 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 blah. That is the absolute worst case scenario. And so we should all just submit to government. We should all just submit to government. And that whenever all citizens, that whenever anybody enters into society, they agree to an unwritten agreement that they will obey, that they will submit. And we're not doing it right when we think otherwise. I come from the street. I come from the background, the idea of, hey, forget the police. We don't submit to anybody. But I don't think that way anymore. I don't think that way anymore. And I don't know why. Maybe it's my political theory. Maybe it's just growing up as a person. But if the police tell me, hey, get on the floor, you know what I'm going to do? Hey, yes, officer, I'm on the floor. Put your hands behind your back. Yes, officer, my hands are behind my back. You just obey them. And listen, this is not anything biased, going one way or other, left, right, Democrat, whatever. No, I'm just referencing a book that was written 400 years ago, before this whole Democrat, Republican thing ever even came on the scene. This is a political theory that goes back to the ancient Babylonians, where you submit. Read the Epic of Gilgamesh and see what they put up with from Gilgamesh, their ruler. And yet they considered him like a god on earth, and they said we're still going to obey him, even though they put him through a lot. He put them through a lot. But again, almost any society is better than no society. And of course, there are a couple caveats here. It's not unconditional obedience. So Hobbes will lay out, if the government wants to kill you or your family, or seriously injure you or your family, or wrongfully imprison you or your family, then you should not obey the government, because you're submitting to government in the first place in order to not die from savages, in order to not be made a slave, in order to not be injured. So the only time that you rebel against government is when they try to kill you, injure you, make you a slave, or if they want to make you do something that is so against your conscience that you just know God will be angry with you, then you may need to die as a martyr. Then you disobey. But those are very rare situations, and especially here in the United States, because a cop says, hey, put your hands behind your back. Hey, you're coming with me down to the police station. Hey, you're going to jail for 30 days. Whatever the situation is, just obey. Almost anything is better. Almost anything is better than no government. And the truth is, a lot of it comes down to our pride. And I say this is something that's good for our times because, man, a lot of people are big-headed. They're just hot-headed. And they think, man, I rule this. Nobody knows what authority is anymore. Nobody knows what authority structures are. Nobody has any concept of obedience. They think that they just could do anything they want. And this, again, it's a good book. It's a 400-year-old book. I recommend it. Bring some perspective back to life. Again, we're privileged to be in society. We don't, we have to give up some of our rights in order to be in this society, in order to have peace. So, something to think about. God bless you.